Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today for the next iteration of our Energy Code implementation series. Today, we're going to be focusing on ADUs. We have Jennifer Rennick and Grant Murphy from Imbalance Green Consulting leading today's training. And I'm Chloe from the Tri-County Regional Energy Network. I have a few logistics slides to go over before I pass things off to Jennifer and Grant. Please make sure that you are on mute for the duration of this training. If you have any questions, you can add them to the chat. Grant will be monitoring the chat and providing answers in chat. And if any questions need to be gone over in a little bit more detail, he'll pause Jennifer and have her explain. We'll also have some time at the end for questions if you have anything a little bit that you want to go into in a little bit more detail. We're recording today's training, and you will get a copy of that recording and the slides in your inbox in the next few days. We also have a survey that we're going to be launching at the end of today's training, so please stick around for that. It really helps us out if you can fill out the survey. We take all of the responses that we get and we use them to inform the kind of courses we're going to offer in the future. So if you liked today's training and you want to see more like this in the future, it definitely really helps us out to get that feedback in our surveys. And then just a few words about who we are. We are the Tri-County Regional Energy Network, aka 3C-REN. 3C-REN is funded by ratepayer dollars that we all pay into in our utility bills through the public goods charge. And the benefit of being ratepayer funded is that there is no cost to those we serve. And as a regional energy network, we are able to return these dollars back to our local economy, which has historically missed out on some of these funds. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. 3CRN currently offers 6 programs that are focused around 3 services. These include incentives, training, and technical support. Today's training falls under our Energy Code Connect program. To see more trainings that we have and learn more about our programs, you can visit our website at 3c-ren.org. And with that, I'll pass things off to Jennifer and Grant for today's training.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. If you don't mind, would you put in the chat if you're architect or builder or the homeowner or developer or someone from one of the jurisdictions doing code enforcement, then Grant can take a look at that, and we can kind of cater a little bit to you guys, to everyone that's on the call. Today, we're going to do the code implementation. It's for ADUs, accessory dwelling units. It's part of our 5-course series for 3C-REN. And today we do have learning units for architects. If you're need AIA learning units, get 1.5. And if you're ICC and need those learning units, you get your 0.15. And I'll review the agenda. But before that, just a little bit of a kind of background. Jennifer Rennick, Imbalance Green Consulting. I'm a licensed architect and a certified energy analyst. And Grant Murphy, who is on this training with me, is also certified energy analyst through KBEC and is also certified with Passive House and does a lot of commissioning work as well. So we're going to do a quick overview of the 2025 code kind of progress. Then we'll go into some ADU resources and kind of definitions to better understand how the state looks at, and some of the code looks at ADUs as compared to how the energy code classifies that ADU, so you know which part of the energy code to use. And then we'll touch on kind of, some of the key things we notice that come up for new construction builds, and then some of the things that pop up for additions and alterations concerning walls and windows. We'll touch on a little bit of the indoor air quality, domestic hot water, and heat pumps for space conditioning. Anything you want to add, Grant?
Quick results, lots of architects, a couple plans examiners. Thanks for sharing where you guys are at.
Okay, Okay, great. That's helpful. All right. And so in some cases, a few of these things, if you've been on the call before, some of it you may have heard, right? But I'm including some of the 2025 code updates, and also I'll just try and highlight some of the things that come up commonly for architects and what to watch out for. And especially Grant and I will have things to say about domestic hot water solutions for ADUs, because that seems to come up a lot. It's sometimes tricky with the ways you can for new construction builds for your hot water heating system. Okay, the new code for the 2025 building code and energy code is going to come into effect January 1st, 2026. You can get more information on that at energy.ca.gov. And the big picture goals for the energy code is to continue to encourage heat pump technology for space heating and water heating. There was some expansion of PV systems and battery storage standards for non-res occupancy types. There's been some improvement and strengthening our indoor air quality standards. And so there's a little bit that comes into play, prescriptive requirements for residential occupancies, which we'll touch on briefly. And then there's been some updates on our plumbing and piping sizes and chiller and cooling tower requirements for non-res occupancies to save water. But all that together is going to help the state continue in its progress for saving the state $4.8 billion. And the process for adopting the energy code every 3 years is very robust. It includes stakeholders and a lot of public outreach and meetings, which we all can participate in. And the state is working on the next energy code cycle. So now's the time to kind of get involved with that if you're so inclined. And a reminder, the code's going to come into effect January 1st. But kind of big picture on the residential high-level changes, just to kind of be aware of, especially, the architects. When you get your new energy reports for 2025, there is going to be a new metric. So it seems like we were just getting everyone used to this EDR metric, which was kind of like a golf score, and it was a ranked score. And now we're going to have a metric that is based on the long-term costs. And I'll have a slide there just to give you a reminder. So single family metrics for that performance method, and your additions and alterations when you're doing the performance method, which I'll remind everyone what that means. But performance is the computer modeling. Well, I'll have a little slide on that in a moment. But I just wanted to give folks an update that EDR score now is going to be replaced with something called an LSC for long-term system cost efficiency. And it is going to be in dollars per square foot. But I want to just clarify that it's not really the cost that your client, the homeowner or the renter, is going to see. This is more of looking at costs that impact the overall big picture for what the state is doing in terms of cost effectiveness overall for saving energy, but resources, and also including carbon impacts. And the whole goal of this thing is to better account for the impacts of burning fossil fuels, both at the site, directly burning it for our appliances, but also as that fossil fuels are still a source of creating electricity. So we burn natural gas for generators that generate our electricity, and we're moving towards more all electric homes and buildings. But combined with that, we're increasing our battery and other renewable capacities. So this new metric is is to better take that into account. HERS. You know, a lot of you, okay, architects, you know you're going to have HERS raters and HERS projects, and you have a HERS registry to register those, you know, Title 24 CF1 documents. So for under the new code, there isn't a lot of change that we'll see as architects, but the HERS, just FYI, gets a new name. So it's now going to be called ECC for Energy Code Compliance Rater, but they'll still do the same envelope leakage testing, the field verifications for refrigerant charge, your exhaust fans, kitchen hood fans, you know, HVAC efficiency, duct testing, etc. And 3 terms that we use kind of throughout, just a reminder, your mandatory requirements are energy efficiency measures that are applicable to all projects. And I tried to color code the slides. So if it's a mandatory measure, you'll see the orange up at the top. And then if it's a prescriptive component package, you'll see blue, and the prescriptive is essentially following a checklist. So some of the things you have to do for your projects are prescriptive, and there's measures that are required for that prescriptive approach, but that still would be considered a prescriptive requirement, even though you still need to do it, but it's essentially following a checklist. And then the performance method is your computer application or energy modeling. And I'll put that in gray. And this is where you can have trade-offs. So if the checklist approach isn't working for you, you can trade off, say, exterior wall insulation for a better hot water heating system. And as long as your proposed building's budget, energy budget, is less than the standard budget, you're good to go. The new prescriptive requirements now are applying to all the climate zones in California. So that includes all the ones on our call for 3C REN, you know, climate zone 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, all of those. Space conditioning systems are heat pumps, just straight up. So there's no longer a carve out for certain climate zones to have a gas appliance as your prescriptive or your baseline. You still can use gas, but you have to use the performance method. And now there's going to be, along with that, a refrigerant charge verification. So now that new ECC rater will come and verify the refrigerant charge on the heat pump. And then if you do use an energy heat recovery or energy recovery ventilation or heat recovery ventilation, then that system will also need to be ECC or HERS verified. And then for your heat pump water heaters, gas water heaters are still allowed under the performance method. Again, so you have to use a computer, you know, method for that. But otherwise, heat pump water heaters are the new baseline. And that's where a lot of the kind of code changes we're seeing for these residential occupancies is a lot around the heat pump water. Okay, now, unless there's a question about that, I'm going to move on into the accessory dwelling units themselves with a little bit of that background. And so some of that background, it's important to kind of understand where now the code's going to shift, even though a lot of what we're going to talk about for the accessory dwelling units is more or less the same. And so that's kind of the good news for the architects in that sense, that there isn't a lot that you have to worry about for the upcoming code change in January. So our accessory dwelling units have been shown throughout the state to help with affordability, and primarily because no new major infrastructure is needed. You know, some of the benefits too, or there's also opportunity for extended family to join folks, by having an ADU on their property, it also gives people rental income to also help with the affordability, and it allows for some flexible living so that people can have the main house and then have the ADU, and they can now create a space where someone could age in place. ADUs have become very popular, and there are kind of pre-reviewed or pre-approved plan sets available. And this is, we'll have a little bit more to say about this, and just kind of as a heads up, if we have any kind of homeowners on the call, this is available for you to use in many jurisdictions. And if we do have any homeowners on the call, then when we get to the hot water heating section, that's the place you're most going to want to pay attention, because of the plan set you may be looking at and the timing of when you are going to get your permit. There's a great resource for accessory dwelling units on at the California Department of Housing and Community Development. So www.hcd.ca.gov. It's the Accessory Dwelling Unit Handbook. And I just want to give a heads up that if you've downloaded, looked at it in the past, they just updated it as of January 2025. And I think this is a good resource. And I noticed that some of the questions and answers have clarified some of the issues that people are having with building ADUs, and some of their questions, especially like around multifamily projects that have ADUs and what's allowable. So you can have ADUs for multifamily occupancy types. Today, we're primarily going to focus on the single family occupancy type. But even if that ADU is part of a multifamily project, it really depends on if you're just building one or two. If it's a single or a duplex, it's going to fall under what we're talking about here. But it is possible to have up to 8 ADUs on a multifamily project, depending on the size of it, where the 8 are grouped together. And in that case, if they're all attached, stacked on top of each other, it then becomes another, low-rise multifamily building. But today we're going to focus on the single family occupancy type requirements. So ADU is an accessory dwelling unit, but the thing is, it's complete with independent living facilities for one or more persons. And, the clarifying definition is that it's permanent provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitations, i.e. bathrooms. So the bathroom facilities are independent. It can have an efficiency kitchen or a full kitchen, but it still has to be reasonably sized for true food preparation and storage. And we do have a resource on the 3cren.org efficiency kitchen. For more information, you could go to 3cren's website. And the heating and cooling system cannot share air with another dwelling, and it has to have its own thermostat and independent controls. And then, that meets the definition of an ADU. And in this picture, thank you, Julie Clayton, local architect, there's a bathroom behind the refrigerator and a closet there, and then a small efficiency kitchen on the right-hand side, and then the rest of the living space. So that all met the definition of accessory dwelling unit. The junior accessory dwelling units, JADUs, a lot of times these are conversions of existing space. And as long as it's not greater than 500 square feet and it is contained entirely within the existing structure or proposed single family residence. So it's possible to have a new construction build that's single family, but within that whole single family, you have a portion of it that is delineated as a junior ADU. That's okay. And you can have an efficiency kitchen in it. You do have to have a door to the exterior. And it's okay to have another door that goes to the interior of the space, and it can have its own bathroom, but it may also share the bathroom with the rest of the house. And then that kind of meets the definition of junior ADU. Why that's important is because it kind of comes back to how we think of ADUs and junior ADU types, and the language of like how policy and planning departments talk about it, how it's regulated, but then how does that come back to play with the energy code, so you know which set of requirements that you're going to use for your ADU or your junior ADU. So if it's brand new construction and the building's completely detached, then that has one definition. But if it is attached but internal, it could be a junior ADU, could be an ADU, but then the energy code is going to look at it a little bit differently. And the new construction builds detached is considered new construction, so you're going to fall under the new construction single family. But the other types of ADUs, for example, it could be a detached building, but it's converted because the building existed already. So you convert an existing workshop or an existing garage. Those are considered additions. And then these alterations and additions fall under a different part of the energy code and have different requirements. For the new construction standalone structures under the energy code, this question comes up a lot for us. And the question is, do I have to include solar panels on my ADU? And the answer is yes, unless an exemption, a size exemption applies. But otherwise, new construction, standalone, new structure, you would need to comply with all the requirements for the envelope, the ventilation, your heating, cooling, hot water, be electric ready if you do install any gas appliances, be battery storage ready. And yes, you would have a PV solar panel component. Now, there's 3 other scenarios, and this is where it gets people get hung up a little bit on this, and they're not sure which part of the code to use, which part of the energy code. And that is if you're making an addition or conversion or alteration. So for example, if you are just doing an addition, but it is an independent living quarters and it's addition, then it is new, quote unquote, new to the homeowner, new construction to the homeowner, but the energy code, it's an addition. So you just follow the additions. I think most architects on the call would totally understand that. You have an existing shop or garage conversion that now is also considered an addition, even though the garage or the shop may not technically be attached to the house. So that can hang up people, but that's considered also an addition. And then if you have a garage conversion that is attached, okay, it's same idea. You've converted it. It's also an addition, but it's a little more straightforward because it's attached. And in this case, you're going to be looking at what are those envelope, ventilation, heating, cooling, and hot water requirements for the project. But, depending on if it's ADU or JADU, that'll come back to how you're going to treat your bathroom. And that in turn can impact some of the other features. And then we are going to hit on kind of the difference, what the wall or floor roof requirements are when it's an addition versus a brand, standalone new construction. Now, for alterations to for a project to qualify for an alteration, the real key here is to double check that the JADU isn't increasing the space more than 500 square feet. So it has to be built within the walls of the existing structure. So in this case, you know, for your clients, we're really saying it's like an interior remodel. And in that case, it's not increasing the conditioned floor area. And so that's important because under the energy code, then it's considered an alteration. And there are wall exceptions, ceiling exceptions, and then it does impact what's required for the ventilation and your heating cooling system, and whether or not you choose to have a hot water heater replacement. Anything on that, Grant, you want to add? I think I covered it.
No, that designation comes up all the time. So if anyone has any questions about it, it's a good one to make sure you're clarified on. We get it specifically for the PV consideration pretty consistently.
Yes, and when we say questions, did I fail to mention that Grant and I are both energy codes? So for the energy code coach service that 3C REN offers. So when we say we get a lot of questions on that, we're really thinking about what kind of questions are coming to us under that energy code coach service. And the things I covered are a lot of what people need a little help navigating. And even after they've heard all that, still, sometimes it helps to just shoot us a code coach question to clarify.
We had a follow-up on that. Tally. An existing detached accessory structure is demolished due to substandard conditions and rebuilt in place. Is this new or can it be considered an addition alteration?
Well, Grant, how about you answer that? No, I'm kidding.
I always defer to the AHJ who
That's
is classifying the permit because it is common practice. We see a lot where people try to say that it's an alteration by leaving an existing wall up of some amount,
that's
and
what I was gonna
then
say.
it can be called an addition. If the planning agency, the building department is allowing that, then it's technically an addition alteration project. If it's truly demolished and it's being rebuilt, it's new construction.
Right.
As an energy consultant, you kind of got to defer to how they got the project permitted.
Yes, and with that, I'd also say, think about that. If you're really in that situation, and let's say it was an old shop and it's a slab on grade, you got to really take a look at if you're really demoing it to that extent, are you really going to reuse the concrete slab? That would be something just from, kind of a energy perspective, but also just a moisture mitigation perspective, because depending on the age of it, there may never have been a vapor barrier under that slab. And that could be really problematic, especially with some of the requirements, even for additions under the energy code. The whole idea behind the code is to make the building more tight, make it less leaky. And if that slab is a source of constant moisture and vapor into the space, that could be problematic. And so then if you're really taking out the slab and doing it all right, then yeah, you're new construction. Okay, for new construction, there are, even for a small ADU, you would still have these electric ready requirements, PV requirements, and a lot of the other things that go along with new construction. And so this is where you're going to be getting into those mandatory measures in section 150.0. And if you do choose to install a gas or propane water heater for this ADU, you must at least make sure that there would be enough future space for a heat pump water heater, and that you have the proper electrical setup and a space in your electrical panel for future use. Same with furnace. If you end up doing a furnace, you need to have it electric ready for a future heat pump. Same with a cooktop. You need to have it ready for a future electric cooktop. It could be induction or electric resistance. And same with the dryers. If you do provide a washer dryer for the ADU and you end up going with gas, you need to make sure that you at a later date can swap that to an electric dryer. So that still all applies. And the photovoltaic system, solar system applies. And the kind of the cutoff we see with ADUs is whether or not the required PV, once you follow the formula based on your conditioned floor area, and that does include the exterior walls in that conditioned floor area, and based on how many bedrooms you have in your ADU. And then if that PV system size is smaller than 1.8000, but 1.8, if it's smaller than that, you technically wouldn't have to install the PV system. It would be exempt. So as an example, this one's kind of borderline. If you were building 1,000 square foot ADU in climate zone 6, so in Santa Barbara, do the formula, you would end up with a PV panel size that's 1.82. So it's just beyond the threshold. So you would have to install the solar panels. And let's say you had a 300 watt rated panel, that would be 6 panels would cover that requirement. The panels, they actually produce more than 300 watts. So you could get an idea of about how much space you need to allocate for that solar system. If it turns out the available area on the roof that has solar access is less than 80 square feet, you don't have to install it. And if you end up including a battery that is 7.5 kilowatt hour rated capacity and you install that battery with the system, then you can actually reduce your PV size by 25%. So there's those things that can come into play. And we see that these kind of exceptions pop up more with ADUs because of their small, relatively small footprint. For 2025 code, there's just some clarification that when we talk about battery capacity, we're talking about, by usable air quotes, they mean the cycling, when your battery cycles charge, discharge, charge, discharge, that cycling capacity is 7.5 kilowatt hours. And then also they've added a little bit more requirement on concerning the SARA. So if it's a low sloped roof, you would take that SARA, multiply it times 14 watts per square foot, and then whichever is less, the formula or the 14 watts times the SARA. So it's possible you could have the 14 watts times the SARA would be less than the formula, but still more than 1.8. So you would end up using the SARA formula. Battery ready, meaning you don't have to install a battery. It is a credit option. You can install it, but nonetheless, you do have to allow for space for the ability to more easily add a battery at a future date. And so this part of the code section goes through some of the requirements for that. And then one of the things that have come up with some of the architects that we've worked with in the area, and I'm sure this comes up for other people, is with a small ADU, there's also sort of less space on the ADU for some of these things. One project we were consulting on in Grover Beach area, their solution was just a lot of this went on the main house. And it is possible for this 225 amp main electrical panel requirement that is kicked in with new construction. It's okay to upgrade the panel on the main house to 225 square feet. 225 amp, and then give the new ADU a sub panel. That's okay. For performance pathway, so you're doing the computer modeling and you've decided you're going to go ahead and install the battery anyway. By installing the battery, you've met the battery ready requirement. So you don't have to do anything else but get it installed. But if you do install it, then that minimum battery size, kind of the minimum battery cycling capacity is 5 kilowatt hours. It does need to interface with the grid, and the performance credit's relatively small, and the battery with the PV system combined can be cost effective. So the whole idea is to increase a household's electric generation and storage to be able to offset the electrical grid usage and address resiliency, so that instead of firing up gas powered generators throughout the state called peaker plants to produce electricity in the evening, if more people had batteries installed with their solar, then they could use their batteries for that evening peak energy use instead. Now, for the 2025 code update, they've just kind of clarified the definition for that battery system self-utilization credit, and it is related to the new metric LSC energy budget, and that added battery can be used to offset the building efficiency part of the score, part of your performance score. So what that means is that now you can use that battery under the new code coming up to offset other measures that were less energy efficient. So that might be useful for people under the new 2025 code. And then kind of a reminder, if you're not familiar with the blueprint, it is a California Energy Commission publication that's got a lot of helpful information on questions and answers related to the energy code. And this particular edition, I took some excerpts from it, and it just clarifies that, for example, you could use a 200 amp panel for the ADU and have the house have the 225 amp panel. And there's other clarifications with the battery, so that, if you install the battery, it qualifies as your electric ready, for example. But you're going to get a copy of the slides, and this will be in there for you as a reference with the link to all of those newsletters. Grant, anything you want to say about the batteries, PVs, new construction, or anything?
I was just gonna add that blueprint is a really great resource. A lot of the time, if anyone's unfamiliar with it, it's not the most easily searchable, because they just publish them and have them for download by month. So you kind of have to either stay on top of scanning them or dig through them to look for answers. But a lot of the real world application interpretations of the code and clarification are posted in that blueprint. So it's a really great resource when you're working in this consistently.
Yeah, that's right. So we like it, but the benefit to you all is we can read all this, and then you can call us through the Code Coach service. And so that's another way to get access to it. Okay, so now specifically to kind of touch a little bit on roofs, but we're going to spend a little more time on walls and windows and kind of how that looks for the new construction, the additions, and the alterations, because those things change depending on what type of ADU, or if it's a junior ADU, the alterations might kick in. So just kind of FYI, for our roofs under the new 2025 code, basically climate zones 8, 9, and 10 got an upgrade to an R38 attic insulation as opposed to an R30. But most of the climate zones that we're dealing with on the Central Coast are, 4, 5, 6, and 7. We still have an R30. And then there is a new prescriptive option for all climate zones where you can use an R38 cavity or equivalent if you're going to do a cathedral, unvented cathedral rafter roof situation. And so I included a couple details for that, and then you just kind of a heads up on the 2025 code. Concerning walls, prescriptively, which becomes the baseline for the performance method, there hasn't been too much of a change, so you don't have to be too worried about that, and especially for our Central Coast climate zones. But mostly we're seeing ADUs that are framed walls, and so based on your climate zone, the requirement is going to be a U factor. So climate zones 4 and 5, for example, a U factor 0.048. Now with climate zone 6 and 7, it's a bigger U factor, means less insulation required, a 0.065, and then all the other climate zones are also the 0.048. But what does that translate into? For what do you have to do as an architect? Well, it's pretty straightforward. If you're in climate zone 6 and 7, so Santa Barbara on the coast, it's straightforward. You just can build your ADU with a 2x4 wall and an R15 cavity fill and an R4 exterior insulation, and you're done. But the problem is most people don't want, we're finding a lot of folks, they're not sure still how to detail with the exterior insulation. So they want to, use the performance method to trade it off and not have to do that. And so that's where we end up seeing a lot of folks go with the performance method, and they're going to choose other things to do that are more energy efficient. And same idea with climate zones 1 through 5 and 8 through 16. You're going to bump up to a 2x6 wall, cavity fill with either R20, 19, 21, or 23, etc. And then you would have an R5 or an R6 on the exterior of continuous insulation for that. What this looks like in practice is an exterior rigid board type of insulation over your structural sheathing and usually your house wrap of some type. And you can use variety of projects, and there's some great details even that rockwool.com and 475.com have put out to help designers, architects, builders understand what that looks like. But like I said, most of the time we're seeing architects still wanting to trade this off. And mostly it's because they're not sure how to deal with the window detailing. But once you figure that window detailing out, it's really straightforward actually to do continuous exterior insulation. For the windows and door requirement, there's been a little bit of a change for 2025. Right now, the requirement for a U factor for windows in all the climate zones is a 0.30. And all the window manufacturers are making windows that come in a 0.30. A lot of the manufacturers now are making windows with a much lower U factor, which will be easy to meet the new 2025 energy code, where a number of the climate zones have changed to been updated to a 0.27. So lower U factor, better windows. So that does include climate zone 4 and 5 in our Tri-County region, but most of the remaining climate zones in our Tri-County region, 6, 7, and 9, still a 0.3. And then there was one climate zone that had a change in the solar heat gain coefficient, and I just realized that I made a typo. And climate zone 15, I will correct this before I get the slide out to you. It was a 0.23 solar heat gain coefficient, but now climate zone 15, which is inland, like in the inland California area, it's going to be a 0.20. And it'll just block out more heat. Now, when it comes to ADUs, because of their small footprint, what we're noticing, or what I've been noticing on your Title 24 compliance computer, you're still being compared to the prescriptive baseline, and it's the total amount of glass area being 20% of the floor area that can be problematic, and in terms of compliance, and the certain climate zones, like climate zone 6 and 7 and 4, for example, it should only have 5% of the total floor area facing west. That can be tricky for a ADU, and I have a sketch of why that is in the slide after next. But before we do that, I just want to remind folks, because of wildfires, that there is an exception for the mandatory requirement of the glazing, and you can use glass or windows rather that don't meet these requirements, because there's just clarification that windows and skylights installed in buildings meeting now the 2025 Title 24 Part 7, which is a new part that's coming out, a new book you're going to be getting for your whole Title 24 package, that where buildings are located in fire hazard severity zones that are high, very high, you can now use fire rated windows, and you get an exemption. And it's important to know that, because a lot of the fire rated windows have view factors around 0.42. Oh, and this makes a big difference, because we're talking about climate zones now decreasing that view factor to 0.27, and our old, under the current code is a 0.30. So the fire rated windows are going to be wildly off, but there is an exemption for that. For the prescriptive example, so let's say you're not in one of those fire rated zones and you're complying with everything else prescriptively, or your standard baseline is being compared to the prescriptive. A lot of times we end up seeing the ADUs having to go with the performance method, because the amount of glass allowable for the ADU isn't acceptable to a lot of the designers and the homeowners. And so take, for example, you have a 330 square foot small, very small ADU, and you may end up with a total of 65.5 square feet. 66 square feet's allowable. Okay, it complies, but when you look at it, you're really ending up with some small windows. Like you might have three 3.5 by 5 foot windows, that's not bad. But then that just leaves like one 3 foot by 3 foot window, another 3 foot by 1 foot window, and 1 foot by 1 foot window. So if that doesn't work for folks, then you're going to want to use the performance method to get more glass, more view, more aesthetic perhaps into your project, which means automatically you have to do the performance method. And if you're also trying to trade off that exterior insulation, that's where we're seeing some of the ADUs having some trouble passing the code. So I think you just have to be strategic. For your ADUs that are considered additions, then the requirements for the walls are a little bit different. And this kind of comes back to that question full circle. Well, what if you're tearing down all the walls? And really, what the question you have to ask is, are you remodeling, reworking those exterior walls such that you will be removing and replacing the siding? And if you are, then you are required to meet those new construction standards, which means you would be using the continuous insulation for those to meet those U factors on those wall assemblies. But if it's all done to the from the interior and the exterior siding is all staying intact, then all you have to do is take your 2x4 wall and you put R15 insulation in it, and you take your 2x6 wall, if that's what's existing, and you put an R21 insulation in it, and you're good to go. And the other exception is if you're doing an addition where you have a wall that is in alignment with the existing wall, you can just do that same formula with a R15 and a 2x4 wall, or an R21 and a 2x6 wall, and you don't have to add that continuous insulation. We're not, the code isn't going to make you kind of bump out the new wall when the rest of the walls are, built the other way. And so again, that blueprint, they had a great clarification, and they visually kind of drafted up what does that really mean for a wall extension. And when they talk about a wall extension, and it can be kind of in plane, but it can also go up vertically, it means if it's truly in alignment, it's a wall extension. You don't have to have the continuous insulation. But if you do take the new addition and give it the architectural interest, and you bump it in and create a jog in the wall, then yes, that new wall would prescriptively require the exterior insulation. But that's where you get into the trade-offs. Trade it off with something like a more energy efficient hot water heating system for the whole house, or insulate all of the attic space for the whole house and the addition. For alterations, existing walls with window replacements, we get a bunch of questions about these through the Energy Code Coach, and we've done some workshops with this for some of the authorities having jurisdictions. I created this chart so folks could look at it and kind of get a quick summary of what that U factor and solar heat gain coefficient replacement window or skylight is. If it's 75 square feet or less, you have one set of requirements. But if you're adding new fenestration, or your window replacements greater than 75 square feet, then you're going to comply with the new construction requirements. And an example of that would be if you have an existing master bedroom and you're converting it to a junior ADU. As you swap out and create new windows, you get into the wall framing. Because it's altered, you only need to replace in a 2x4 frame R13 insulation. You could do higher if you wanted, 2x6 and R20, could go higher if you wanted, but you don't have to. And then the windows have changed, however, under the 2025 code. And this is where it gets a little more nuanced on the alterations, and they've just changed it for the climate zones. So this is kind of what it was, but now we said, hey, it's nuanced. We're going to get rid of that table, and we're just going to focus on climate zone 1, 3, 5, 16. And the skylight replacement now as a 0.40, and the window replacement does go to the 0.27. And the exception now has been simplified so that it just is 16 square feet of new window or skylight is the exemption. And then the tables broken out now, climate zone 6 through 10 and 15, and now climate zone 2, 4, 11, 14. This update, the change is that climate zone 15 now has the updated solar heat gain coefficient, and then the skylight replacements is the 0.4, and the window is the 0.27. But I'll go through and double check those numbers, because I think, like I said, I did a typo in climate zone 15. I'll fix that before you get the copy of the slide deck. Sorry about that. That's probably the most tricky or kind of nuanced. So you really have to look at what climate zone you're in if you're trying to just meet the minimum requirements for window alterations. However, because there's so many window types available that all meet the new construction requirements, the easiest thing to do is just, in my opinion, the easiest thing to do is just meet the new window requirements and you're done. But sometimes I know that folks have a hard time with that because they're not going to replace all the windows in their projects, and they're trying to get a window that matches what was existing. For indoor air quality, kitchens, they all have to have a hood exhaust. It's just a requirement. If you have cooking, you need a hood. We still see periodically folks installing combo microwave hoods where it takes the air off the cooktop and just kicks it back into the space. That does not meet the energy code nor ASHRAE 62.2 for quality air. We're meeting the outside air requirement. So just FYI, also authorities having jurisdiction, that's no longer allowable. It hasn't been for a while. The kitchens have to exhaust to the outside, just like your bathroom has to exhaust to the outside. For new construction and additions greater than 1,000 square feet, of course, new construction, this applies, but the additions greater than 1,000 square feet, all of these requirements also comply. It's where you're at like a addition, under 1,000 square feet that it's a bit nuanced. The new requirement for the kitchen hoods is based on the size of the dwelling unit floor area and whether or not it's an electric range or a natural gas range. Natural gas ranges have higher CFM ventilation requirements than electric ranges. So if you're doing an ADU and it's a smaller space and you don't want a really large hood, then consider using the electric or induction range, and then you can use a smaller hood capacity. You're going to get a copy of the slides. That table's in there. And then kind of new to the 2022 code was including field testing of the exhaust ducts following a prescriptive design for that kitchen hood. And the whole thinking behind this and what they've just, what EPA and California Energy Commission discovered is that a lot of kitchen exhaust hood had a lot of elbows, excessive duct length, and so the kitchen hoods weren't really venting like they were supposed to anyway. And then especially if that vent hood didn't have a high CFM and was over a gas range there and in a small dwelling unit, there was a huge buildup of air pollutants in that space. And they did have over a number of years a positive correlation between those situations and cooking with gas and asthma in especially in children. So this is really to improve the health, safety, welfare of folks. And then I've included what the formula is for your fresh outside air, just to give you kind of a idea about that, especially because you don't need a lot of fresh outside air. And this is, independent of the exhaust air from your bathroom and your kitchen hood. This is just how much fresh air you're going to bring into that new dwelling unit. So you still have to comply with the new construction. And this formula, it just will be a small amount, given that your ADU is really going to probably be under 1,200 square feet. Balanced ventilation is what we recommend. So we're starting to see more projects where they have the exhaust fan operating at a low CFM, like 20 CFM continuously, and then having it connected, hardwired to a small supply fan that also brings in fresh outside air. And both of these systems you're able to turn it off if it's poor indoor air quality. There's also really small balanced ventilation with heat recovery systems that also bring in the fresh outside air. But the advantage of some of these newer products for ADUs is that they're through the wall solutions. You don't have extensive ducting, and it is often helpful when you just want to do like spot ventilation and you only need a small amount of outside air because it is a relatively small dwelling. And this is what this Lunos brand looks like during construction. And here's some examples from current collaboratives work where they just built a small ADU in San Luis Obispo, and you can often pair them together. In this case, the two on the left, they're relatively close to each other. We usually like to spread them out much further, but there was other reasons why these two units couldn't be spread out, but shows what inside looks like with a cap, and then the outside just has the small ventilation. And the tube itself is about 5 inches in diameter, I think. It's right around that size. There is a performance credit for that fresh outside air, but the product has to be HVA certified to get this extra credit. So what we're seeing with the small spot ventilation is they're not HVI rated yet. You don't get extra credit for the fact that they have energy or heat recovery for the ADUs, but it's sometimes just a better solution. And so we see them getting installed. They still meet your outside air requirement. You just won't get any extra credit for them in the performance method. For hot water, moving right along, for hot water, currently the requirement is you can use a heat pump water heater. You could install a gas or propane instantaneous water heater. And so depending on which climate zone you're in, that could be your prescriptive baseline. And then if you wanted to do something different than that for the climate zone, you could do the computer performance model. There was also a carve out for new construction. So like your ADU, 500 square feet or less, and additions 500 square feet or less, you could use an instantaneous electric water heater with a point of use distribution. So good thing under the 2025 code update for the new construction additions, they eliminated the instantaneous part of the credit. But for the rest of those other climate zones, just the 2025 code, you're just going to use some type of heat pump for your hot water heating, period. Unless you do the performance method, then you could still install an instantaneous gas water heater. And then for those additions or new construction, you can actually use small electric tank type or an electric instantaneous. But in either case, you have to use what's called point of use distribution. And what that means is that that water heater, whether it's the small tank type or an instantaneous water heater, it has to be right there next to your shower, your sink, your washer. You know, you could have a setup like that. And if it's within certain distances based on the piping diameter, then you would comply with the point of use requirements. For heat pump water heaters, even if you install, or sorry, let me reframe that. If you choose to install a gas or propane water heater in your new construction build, it still has to be heat pump water heater ready. And you're supposed to show that you have a designated space of 30 inches by 30 inches by 7 feet. So you can install a future heat pump water heater. But this is the big caution, the big but, for the architects. When you are doing your drawings, just because the energy code said, oh, you need 30 inches by 30 inches by 7 feet space, that doesn't actually give you enough space really as a closet to be able to install a heat pump water heater. So we're finding this with new construction builds and, you know, the electric ready builds, is that more space is really needed for your heat pump water heaters in order to physically just get the thing installed. And then there's a lot of other kind of ventilation requirements that go with it. And I'll hit on that next. But a lot of folks, they're not really familiar with heat pump water heaters. They're not sure what all's required. So kind of pre-wiring for the future heat pump water heater, there is a good blueprint edition that kind of helps clarify that. And then I, excerpt this with the link to it. So you can go and learn more about that at that site. And then just give you some visuals of all the things that are kind of required for heat pump water heaters. You also hear them advertised as hybrid water heaters. You need to make sure that there is a way to take care of the condensate drain and the condensate water that comes from a heat pump water heater. That's also in the code to say, hey, you got to design for that. Sometimes we see that forgotten. You'll see it like a heat pump water heater with the condensate line coming off of it, and it goes nowhere. It needs to go to a floor drain, or it needs to go to some other approved drainage. Some of the design considerations, we used to say the heat pump water heater needed 750 to 1,000 cubic feet of volume, or use a duct kit. But the newer models, some of them are only needing 350 cubic feet of volume around them. Old temperature ratings were between 45 degree Fahrenheit and up to 90 or 110 degree Fahrenheit. Now the newer models can operate as low as 35 degree Fahrenheit and up to 120 degree Fahrenheit. And because they have these cutoffs, the heat pump water heaters under the 2025 code are required to have a backup electric heating source in case the heat pump can't operate, in case it's outside of those requirements. And the other big thing we find is that when folks do install the heat pump water heaters, and if they add ducts, that's great. If they, once the electrical's connected, sometimes they run the electrical or the duct so close to the top of the tank that the homeowner or occupant or maintenance person cannot pull out the filter, the screen that is there to protect the fan coil or the fan coil inside the heat pump water heater. So include the sketch just to remind folks, architects, to put on your drawings or pull the specs from that heat pump water heater and just kind of help clarify that you need the 6 inches minimum.
I just wanted to add,
Yeah.
kind of what I've been emphasizing with all our clients is the need to actually select or be working with a make model unit that really solves a lot of the problems that we're finding in the field. As you saw in the previous slides, there's a number of things like the required ventilation volume, the airflow volume is changing. When we first started talking about these units, it was like 750 plus to 1,000, really designed to go in a garage. And just in the last few years, these are coming out where the required air volume is lower. I think Jennifer just had some units out there only need 350. That decision, if you say, oh yeah, 350, but then you just don't specify that specific unit and the builder goes to Home Depot and grabs a ream, they might, that installation location and how it was designed might just not work. And now we're fighting with it in the construction side, in the field. So really just emphasizing you're supposed to select the specific model in your energy reports, having that on the plans, having it as many places we can followed through. When you're doing those duct adapter kits, the manufacturers are putting out their specs because they're selling it with the unit. So they often provide diagrams or minimum clearances to help you actually design for that unit. So that's kind of my big takeaway I'm pushing on these.
Yes. Yes, I agree with everything Grant said. And then if by chance you do install a gas unit, or you're like in this diagram, you choose to install a heat pump water heater, you can still do that point of use, meeting that point of use requirement, and you will be able to get some credit in that performance method, which kind of pulls back around to window proportions and exterior insulation. It's not a big credit, but you do get some credit here. Well, actually, I mean, for the hot water heating portion, you get a pretty good credit if you can really do the point of use plumbing. And in a small ADU, it's really possible to do that because you won't have long runs anyway. But it's tight. You're only going to go like 15 feet away from your sink to the manifold on your heat pump water heater, for example. So the new code, there's these new mandatory requirements because of the stuff Grant was talking about and what we're seeing. It tracks, it maps with what the California Energy Commission and all the feedback they got from the public on this. So now in the 2025 code, there's a whole section, and it's not in the residential part. It's in section 110.3, the part that covers all the occupancy types, mandatory requirements for heat pump water heaters. And they include really specifying how much volume of space you need for these units. And it's 100 cubic feet times the compressor capacity, or what the manufacturer tells you you need. And then there is clarification on how much net free ventilation area you need for your closet. If you put the heat pump in a closet and you expect that heat pump to communicate with the rest of the space of the dwelling or a garage, then there's requirement for that. And then there's requirements if you do the duct kits that you have at least an R6 ducts, that the ducts diameter, surface area, cross-sectional area meets the ventilation requirements, and that all the penetrations are sealed, et cetera. And they talk about if you have, only the exhaust ducted or only the supply ducted, your requirements for that. And then just give you like a little heads up that a lot of units, well, the reams anyway, are rated at a 4.2 kBTU hour compressor capacity. And that's pretty common for a lot of them. So if you multiply that times 100, you're talking at least 420 cubic feet of area, as opposed to the newest AO Smith only needing 350. So that's why it's really important, and the rule of thumb we give people is 450 at the minimum. And so you're going to want to, like Grant said, look at the actual unit and make sure you're meeting that requirement. And then I included this little, sidebar here on the definition of net free area from the code. So you can look at that when you calculate it. And then in the latest version of the blueprint diagram, this is coming up. So they have this clarifying diagram, but they didn't include any of the kind of the math behind what they're showing. So I just added this for your benefit. I call it math help, just so you can see where these numbers are coming from and how that matches with what the code is saying. And we're happy to help anybody with this stuff during Code Coach. Now, if doing the integrated heat pump type of water heater isn't working for you for your ADU because of space constraints, there is an alternative with the split system heat pump water heater, where you can squeeze in this holding water tank. It could fit into really tight spaces, like the example on the left where they squeezed it in underneath a staircase. There's no moving parts, no sound, no ventilation you have to worry about. And all of the kind of the working parts of it, the moving parts and the compressor is all outdoors. So it's more expensive, but it can be a huge space saving. And then kind of following up on this, because when you're doing ADUs, you often need some credit someplace if you're not going to meet those prescriptive window area requirements, or we keep seeing, again, like I'm saying, folks mitigate away from the exterior wall insulation. Then they want to look at getting a variable heat capacity credit. And you can do that by installing a ductless heat pump for space conditioning. Now, currently under the code, you can use a gas heating system. You won't get this credit, but it meets the it can meet the prescriptive in certain climate zones, but if it's not that climate zone, you've got to do performance method. Now, new construction, climate zones 3, 4, 13, and 14 are heat pumps anyway, but under the 2025 code climate zones, they're all going to be a heat pump system anyway. So the credit really comes into play by using a ductless system. And this is kind of what the ductless system looks like. It can be wall mounted, ceiling mounted, but an outdoor compressor and an indoor fan coil. They install very easily. And for your ADUs, for example, if you have an existing house and you're doing its ADU addition or a garage connected conversion, you can often run the refrigerant line under the existing house, which makes the installation very simple if you don't want that outdoor unit to like interfere with some other function on the outside. So there's flexibility in where you can locate these. But you have to remember that for the ADU, you can't share the air with the primary residence, so it's not going to be a ducted shared air system. It's going to be, it has to be separate, although you could share the outdoor unit if you're going to upgrade your house. And there has to be separate thermostats. The installation is really straightforward. Oftentimes you can mount the outdoor unit on a fiberglass pad that is just set on like prepared DG or concrete with proper drainage. If not, you can wall mount them. And then for the variable heat capacity credit, to meet that, the main living space in each habitable bedroom would need its own fan coil unit. It can be wall mounted, but the requirement is that the ductless unit is installed within the air barrier and the thermal boundary. So in this case, the air barrier would be taped and sealed drywall in the interior. And we have seen like these ductless wall-mounted units be installed in an alcove, and that's okay as long as you meet the manufacturer's clearance requirements around it. And then that whole alcove needs to be taped and sealed, you know, with the drywall. And same with the ceiling recessed units. So there's two ways you can do that. One is you can specify or build a drywall box essentially that meets the clearances that go up and over and around that ceiling recessed unit, and you need to specify that that's tape sealed and the drywall is acting as the air barrier. Or you can do an unvented attic with your continuous air and thermal boundary to the exterior of your wall and to the exterior part of the roof deck, like by using a sprayed foam up in the attic to air seal it all. And then with that, you do get credit. It's going to show up on your Title 24 report under the required special features. And it'll specifically say variable capacity heat pump compliance credit option that does require HERS features, and that means a HERS rater will come out and look at all of that and make sure that it complies. But you get a pretty decent credit in a lot of the climate zones in the Tri-County region. And that kind of brings us back around for the architects and then those who are on the plans examination side of it. And you really, for your builders and your installing contractors, we're highly, highly recommending that you take a look at that Title 24 report you get and look at what those special features and HERS summaries are, and put that on the front sheet of your plan set so that it's really called out and really noticed. Because if your whole plans are riding on the fact that you might be taking QII credit, a lot of air sealing's required, and there's inspections before at framing stage and after the insulation is installed. If you're doing the variable capacity heat pump credit, you need that credit, then you need the HERS rater to come out there, or ECC rater as it will be called. And then if you are using one of the HVI rated ERV or HRV balanced ventilation systems, those also need the HERS rating or HERS inspection or ECC inspection as it's called. So, and then that, I think the most important thing now we're seeing that's really hanging people up is the heat pump water heaters. And so, especially in the 2025 code, that's going to be coming up more and more. So you're going to want to, I think, kind of alert everyone or make it big and obvious in your drawings that you're going to meet all the requirements and those mandatory measures for those heat pump water heaters. And we're seeing builders trying to work it out in the field because it wasn't in the architect's plan set. And in the field, they're having a hard time with it because ADUs tend to be so compact. Anyway, they're not finding the extra inches they need. And sometimes it's like 3 inches or just only 4 inches on 2 walls. They just need a bit more space and a different door specified or an ability to add the duct kit. But the water heater was installed next to a shear wall and structural doesn't want a big hole in that wall. Like those things we're finding aren't really truly being coordinated. And with an ADU, it's trickier because the space is so tight. So that's my little coaching to all the architects on the call to make the whole project go smoother. And then this, just to show you how to link to those blueprints, when you go to the energy.ca.gov, navigate your way to the newsroom, or you can just use the search bar newsroom. Then once you get to newsroom, you can, once you get to newsroom, then you can click the link blueprint newsletter, and then that window will pop up, and then you can dig into the expand all and go in by publication. And if you have questions, Code Coach, we're here. Send us, drop us a line, and we're happy to work with you and get your Code Coach questions answered. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to our 3C Ren host, Chloe, and she can tell you a little bit about the upcoming courses, and then we might have 1 or 2 minutes left to answer any questions if anything popped up in the chat, or if anyone had raised their hand and has a question.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. And thanks, Grant, for all your instruction today and answering everyone's questions. And thanks everyone so much for joining us. Hopefully everyone has seen the survey I just launched. I see a few of you have already completed it. If you haven't already, please take a minute to complete it. It's only a few questions, and we really do value this feedback a lot. It helps us decide what courses we're going to be offering in the future. So if you have an idea for something you'd like to see, or if you'd like to see more, like today's course, definitely let us know in the survey. We also have education units available for today's training. If you have any questions about receiving these units, please reach out to Danica. Her email is on the screen here. And as a reminder, you will be receiving these slides as well as the recording from today's training in your inbox next few days. We have a few exciting courses coming up. We have our next a course in the Energy Code Implementation Series on July 23rd. So if you guys have been tuning in, that's the next one to look out for. And we also have an exciting one on Friday this week. It's something different than 3C Ren typically does. It's called Ask the Experts, and we're going to have Nick Brown and Gary Klein on to just answer any questions any people have about heat pump water heater installations. So you can bring photos, bring your questions, and they're going to be diving into any issues, any problems that you guys have had in this area. And that's it from me. So I'll pass things back to Jennifer and Grant for any last minute questions. Thanks.
Thank you.
If you have any questions, shoot them in real quick and we'll try to answer off the cuff here. If you're running into this heat pump water heater deal, that if you catch Gary Klein in a Q&A, that's a great opportunity. He'll get all the unique installations and really inside baseball of heat pump water heaters. So I highly recommend attending that.
Yeah, I do too. Both the two of them have been doing a lot with the heat pump water heaters. Just like things to watch out for, things you should understand. They have a great slide on.
They've got all the
Yeah.
horror stories. We had a
Yeah.
question. Are all range hoods going to need HERS testing in 2025?
Well, I don't know if the range hood is going to need the new ECC/HERS testing, but right now, theoretically, you could have the installing contractor test and show. But a lot of times what our HERS rater is really looking for as part of the CF2R, CF3R series is that it meets the CFM rated and the SONS, the sound rating that is applicable to the type of appliance and the size of the dwelling. So they'll kind of double check those things to see that that was complied with, and then it's a visual thing, and if all those things work, then you've met that compliant. And then theoretically you would be able to comply prescriptively because you would not have more than 3 elbows, it'd be less than 25 feet length, so you might not really need someone to do a flow hood test on it.
And we had
But
another one.
I'm not sure if I answered the question exactly, but I mean, an ECC or HERS rater you'll still have the CF2R, CF3R component of it.
Another one was asking if it'll still have to be HVI or HAAM certified. My understanding is yes, that's not going anywhere.
That's right. And then there will be a new, like if it's, we haven't seen many that are showing this way, but they had that, it was like, you need under a gas range, you need like 280 CFM or hood capture efficiency, CE rating. But we haven't been seeing many hoods that are showing it with the capture efficiency rating.
Yeah, like all registries and certified databases, hopefully they add more to it. That's kind of falls on the manufacturer and can be annoying.
Yeah. Okay, we're 2 minutes after 11. Do we see any other questions in the chat? Because I do want folks to be able to get on with their day.
Yeah, I
I
think we're good.
appreciate you all attending.
If you have any questions after something comes up, always plug the code coach. We're happy to help you guys out.
All right, I'll wrap things up there. Thanks so much, Jennifer. Thanks so much, Grant. Great as usual. And thanks everyone for coming again. Hope to see you guys on another webinar soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.